Avengers!
When Marvel released Avengers Endgame in 2019, it was the epic peak of the MCU.
Assemble.
The movie brought together every superhero in the cinematic MCU into one universe-wide battle, and fans couldn't wait to see how the Infinity Saga would end.
Rarely do you get an opportunity as a filmmaker to work on movies that are cultural events like this.
But after Endgame, Marvel had a problem. This happened to Iron Man.
You can rest now.
And Captain America turned into this guy.
Maybe I'll try some of that life Tony was telling me to get.
For the first time in more than a decade, the MCU was a clean slate. So what was next?
There are more projects in less years because of all the amazing stuff we're now allowed to do on Disney+.
Yes, we got a lot of content fast. Marvel released 10 movies and 10 miniseries in just 3 years. Yet, strangely enough, it feels like all the content is going nowhere. But why? For years, Marvel cultivated the characters of their main franchise heroes, namely the leaders of the superheroes, Iron Man and Captain America. When we first met Tony Stark, he was nothing more than an irresponsible, rich playboy. But then, he gets a wake-up call. When he's kidnapped by terrorists, it forces him to start becoming more responsible, and we see him take control of his life.
I am Iron Man.
As we see Iron Man more and more, we watch him struggle with his major flaw, selfishness. But over time, we see him grow, like the time he decides to sacrifice himself by grabbing a nuke and sending it through the portal to save New York City. Here, Tony was no longer the guy who would always put himself first. Tony matures over time, even helping heroes like Spider-Man. By the time we see him in Endgame, he's willing to sacrifice everything to save the people that the world lost in Infinity War. In an ultimate act of selflessness, with limited options left, he sacrificed himself. Marvel introduced Steve Rogers as Captain America not long after Iron Man, but he was almost the exact opposite of Tony. He wants nothing more than to sacrifice himself for his country during World War II.
Come on, there are men laying down their lives. I got no right to do any less than them.
But he isn't healthy enough to be a soldier. So he takes an experimental serum to make him strong, and he sacrifices himself to take down a plane carrying weapons of mass destruction.
Steve?
He survived, of course, and we saw him take charge and become a confident leader. But when the arcs of Iron Man and Captain America concluded, Marvel had to find new stars for their franchises. Like Falcon, the former sidekick to Captain America. He was a familiar face, but we didn't learn much about who he was, besides a veteran with a troubled past.
You lose someone?
My wingman, Riley.
Then, at the end of Endgame, Steve passes along his shield to Falcon. Suddenly, a sidekick was supposed to become Captain America. But how would Marvel transform Captain America's friend into Captain America himself? Enter a new miniseries, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. From the first episode, we do get to know Falcon a little better. We see more of his backstory and his family life in his home state of Louisiana. But the central issue of the series is Falcon's reluctance to accept the Captain America shield and fill Steve's place.
Feels like it belongs to someone else.
Falcon was afraid he couldn't live up to Steve's legacy, but the series establishes this problem almost too well, to the point where they can't stop mentioning Steve and how special he was.
Steve represented the best in all of us. Steve did not put you in jail.
But there has never been another Steve Rogers, has there?
Most of the series ends up focusing a lot more on who Steve was, instead of who Falcon is or will become. So when he finally does accept the shield near the end of the series, it feels rushed. The moment feels like a letdown because it's missing a key element that both Iron Man and Captain America had in their first movies.
You've got to do better.
A dramatic wake-up call when they decide to become the hero. Tony was kidnapped by terrorists. Steve sacrifices his life. But Falcon almost just wandered into the decision. Like he made the choice off-screen and then told us about it. And in a way, it's still about Steve.
It doesn't matter what Steve thought.
So Falcon ends up feeling like he's still a side character for most of his own series. And after Endgame, a lot of new characters entered the MCU, like Shang-Chi, the Eternals, and the Marvels. But with these characters, it feels like the MCU is aiming for quantity over quality. Before Endgame, Marvel had a storyline centered around 6 major heroes who made up the original Avengers. Marvel focused on developing these key heroes, so we became more invested in them, and it was a lot easier to get behind them.
Kevin, you put us in a position where we lived our lives looking at each other in the eyes and playing these big stakes moments and being in trouble together and saving each other and worrying about each other.
Now there are a lot of characters to go around, but there's no Iron Man figure to lead Marvel into a new era, or a Captain America figure to unite the heroes. And the issue isn't that the characters aren't interesting. Take Shang-Chi, for example. He was just a normal guy until we learn he's the son of a terrorist leader. We see him transform from a guy who ran away from his problem as a teen to a determined man ready to take on his father to protect a village.
You trained your son to be a killer. Is this what you wanted?
It was great, at least as a standalone movie. The problem is that we aren't seeing how Shang-Chi's character is relevant to any other characters in the MCU. Since it was released in 2021, none of the other movies and shows have even referenced it. The MCU sets itself apart with its commitment to its multi-phase structure that makes all the characters intertwine across the series of movies. That's why the MCU became so unique.
You know, the truth is, when we were doing Phase 1, Phase 2, and Phase 3, there were less projects over more years.
The crossover events gave characters more interactions, good and bad, and it made them a lot more interesting. No two characters showed this better than Iron Man and Captain America themselves.
No trust. Fire.
As the two strongest forces of the Avengers, they butt heads regularly from day one.
Big man in a suit of armor. Take that off, what are you?
Genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist.
Their disagreements come from their differences in character. Tony's stubbornness often gets in the way of Steve trying to lead.
Stark, we need a plan of attack.
I have a plan. Attack.
Steve calls out Tony for not being willing to sacrifice himself for the sake of others.
You're not the guy that made the sacrifice play. To lay down on a wire and let the other guy crawl over you.
I think I would just cut the wire.
They even end up fighting each other in Captain America: Civil War. The conflict brought us emotional scenes like this. It was moments like these between major characters that made us feel so invested in the MCU. And the growth between the characters led to unforgettable moments like the heart-wrenching goodbye between Spider-Man and Iron Man. But after Endgame, the movies haven't brought the characters together enough to show how they develop together. Right now, the characters are all on their own paths. Sometimes it doesn't even feel like they're in the same universe. And the superheroes aren't the only issue. A big part of making the MCU work is having a strong central villain character, like Thanos. Thanos made an appearance 7 years before Endgame in the first Avengers movie. And for years, the MCU carefully set up the plot of Infinity War and Endgame with the placement of the Infinity Stones and other connectors. These all pointed to a looming battle with Thanos. Now, a new villain has entered the universe, Kang. There's only one problem. We've only seen him in one movie. And we haven't seen any connections between Kang's story and the rest of the characters in the MCU. So, right now, there's no big reason to rally behind the heroes. The question remains, will they ever have a moment as powerful as this again? Or will we be left asking after every new release,
Iron Man.
what's the point?